Good afternoon, folks. I hope this is finding everybody well. This is going to be the beginning of my lecture series on the topic of nutrition and digestion in the animal kingdom. If you are in my biology class, you should probably hop on Blackboard and get a copy of the summary lecture notes for this chapter before you watch this so that you have spellings of important terms and so forth handy for your reference. Now, you as an animal are a heterotroph, Heterotroph. And if you do not remember the meaning of that term from previous lessons, a heterotroph is any organism that consumes food as a way of getting energy. Basic metabolic strategies for all animals. You're either an autotroph, you make your own food, as plants do, with photosynthesis, or you are a heterotroph, meaning you extract your food from somewhere else. Specifically, animals are what are known as chemoheterotrophs. A chemoheterotroph is an organism that relies on external food not only for energy, but also for biosynthesis, that we need to take in food to provide raw materials for the building parts of our body, but we also need to take in food as raw materials for aerobic respiration for the production of ATP. By contrast, there are certain organisms that are photoheterotrophs, where they need biosynthesis food, but they don't need energy production food. A classic example would be the Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap and other carnivorous plants like that, the Venus flytrap, the sundew, the pitcher plant, all of them are organisms that photosynthesize to make their own food, but they require biomolecules extracted from things they eat in order to engage in biosynthesis, and therefore they eat insects not for energetic purposes, but to give themselves the raw materials they need. That's a photoheterotroph, but we are chemoheterotrophs. So that means that your diet requires you to take in external nutrients. That is the only way that an animal is able to sustain its metabolism. There are a lot of different ways of doing that. So we're going to be dealing with in the next chapter the basic strategies animals have for acquiring their food, the kinds of foods that you need, the nutrients an animal requires and why, and a little bit about basic digestive systems and taking a look at how animals organize their digestive tubes and structures for the breakdown and processing of food. Because remember, another one of the qualities of being a member of Kingdom Animalia is not just the requirement of food, but also internal digestion. In other words, that we not only take in food from our environment, but that we break that food down in internal digestive compartments as a fundamental way of consuming it. Ultimately, animal digestive systems have to carry out four fundamental functions. First off, ingestion, I-N-G-E-S-T-I-O-N. That's the simple one. Ingestion is taking in the food. You pick up the Big Mac, you cram it into your face. Secondly, we have digestion. Digestion is the breakdown of the food once you have consumed it. That can be divided into two components. We have physical or mechanical digestion. That is the breakdown of large chunks of food into small food particles. That can be done by chewing. That can be done by the result of digestive compartments like the stomach churning the food with acid. There are a few other ways that can be done. And there's also chemical or enzymatic digestion. And chemical or enzymatic digestion, as the name implies, involves enzymes. That is the chemical breakdown of small food particles into individual biomolecules, releasing the amino acids, fatty acids, simple sugars, and other basic nutrients stored in the food. Once you're done with the digestion component, next up is absorption. Your digestive structures have to be able to absorb those nutrients and convey them to the parts of the body that require them. And finally, there is elimination. Elimination is the removal of non-digestible material. So animals have to concern themselves with all of these facets of food processing, and our bodies have to be built in a way to accommodate all of them. Now, there are many ways this can be done. We don't all do it the same way. Some animals have very simple food acquisition and processing strategies. Some have extremely complex ones. So let's start with the basics. How do you eat? There are several different food intake strategies for ingestion. How do you ingest your food? We are what is called a bulk eater. When you are a bulk eater, that means you are consuming big chunks of food at once, whether that means you're taking bites off of a mass of food to consume it, or whether that means you're swallowing your food whole. But one way or another, a bulk feeder is taking in big hunks of food all in one go from the world around it. Now, you could also be what we call a substrate feeder. A substrate feeder, S-U-B-S-T-R-A-T-E, is an organism that literally lives in or on its food. Consider, for example, a termite that burrows into a log. The termite dwells in tunnels burrowed out of the log, but it's also eating its way through the log. So that is a substrate feeder. It is literally living in its food source. Consider a leaf miner caterpillar, which climbs onto a leafy plant and then devours the leaf that it's sitting on bit by bit. Consider less pleasantly a scabies mite. The scabies mite burrows down into your skin and it devours dead skin cells, making itchy paths through your skin as it makes its living in you. Not fun. Now, while we're thinking about not fun animals burrowing into our flesh and consuming us, let's talk about fluid feeders. If an animal is a fluid feeder, that means that it sucks nutritive fluids out of whatever food source it's drawing upon. When you think fluid feeders, the natural thing to think of is going to be parasites, animals that are sucking blood or other fluids out of the bodies of their prey. Think about a flea, for example. Think about a tapeworm. Think about a vampire bat. Those are all fluid feeders. But your fluid feeder can also be a somewhat more benign organism. Consider, for example, the hummingbird, which is a fluid feeder that sips nectar from out of flowers. And consider also the possibility of having external prey that you digest and then suck up the fluid. Consider spiders. A lot of spiders inject venom into their prey, which basically liquefies their prey from the inside, and then they suck the liquid out of their bodies. And then finally, in terms of our overall ways of taking in food, the very simplest way, arguably, is to be what we would call a filter feeder, or also known as a suspension feeder. A suspension feeder or filter feeder is extracting nutrients from the water around it. That it basically is going to be a strictly marine organism, that it is relying on food particles suspended in a liquid medium. And in that way, the animal is sifting little tiny bits of food out of the environment around it. Our cnidarians and our sponges are great examples of suspension feeders, and they're sifting small amounts of nutrients out of the environment around them. A clam is a suspension feeder, sifting nutrients out of the water. It might surprise you to learn that the largest animal on Earth is also a suspension feeder, the blue whale, and all other baleen whales. Now, there are two kinds of whales. There are toothed whales, which are active predators, and then there are baleen whales, and they have a specialized membrane in their mouth called baleen, B-A-L-E-E-N, and the baleen is basically a trap to capture small particulate food, usually microorganisms or very, very tiny organisms in seawater called diatoms. And the basic way that a blue whale eats is just by opening its mouth, sucking in massive volumes of water. The tiny, tiny organisms that it consumes get caught in the baleen and consumed in that way. So both the very biggest and the very simplest animals on Earth are both going to be suspension feeders. And so that's just a couple of ways of getting your food into your body. So we can be a bulk feeder, we can be a suspension feeder, we can be a fluid feeder, we can be a substrate feeder. Now, depending on your feeding mechanism, you're going to have different anatomical structures for purposes of taking in food. If you're a bulk feeder, having a hinged jaw like ourselves is a very effective strategy for tearing chunks of food off of whatever's going on in your environment. If you could also possibly have, say, a long beak, like if you're an insect-feeding bird, a long, narrow beak for reaching into holes in the ground is a good thing to have. If you are a bird that feeds on nuts and seeds, a heavier beak for cracking them open is a useful feeding tool. If you are an earthworm, you have an inverted pharynx that you can actually stick out of your mouth to take in and pull in food as you burrow through the soil. Earthworms are basically substrate feeders. We could have a sponge that really just has pores in its body for taking in water and sifting organic nutrients out as they pass through the spongiceal. We could have even suction apparatus, specialized sucking teeth or a specialized suctioning beak like that of a hummingbird, or like the mouth parts of a leech that latch onto their prey so that they can suck blood from them. So a wide variety of anatomical structures. You can look at an animal's basic mouth parts, if you will, because all animals fundamentally are taking in food through a mouth or mouth-like opening, with the exception, of course, of our buddies, the sponges, that really don't have anything like that. But basically look at the parts and you'll get a good idea what kind of dietary strategy the animal is following. Speaking of, let's talk dietary strategy, because not all animals require the same kinds of food. There are a couple of broad dietary strategies that different animals follow. Most animals can be broadly classified in one of three ways. We can talk about herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. Now, an herbivore, and note the spelling, H-E-R-B-I-V-O-R-E. The H is silent. It is herb, not herb. Our herbivores are plant feeders. These are animals that rely on plant matter as their primary source of nutrition. Now, when you're an herbivore, you have some special considerations here because your plant food, first off, is not trying to escape from you. So you don't have to invest as much energy in food acquisition, at least not in terms of having to fight your food, chase your food, outwit your food. You'll find that a lot of herbivores are not as intelligent as equivalently sized carnivores simply because they don't need as much processing power to figure out how to get their food. You'll find that herbivores tend to spend more of their time eating than carnivores do simply because plant foods tend to be less nutritionally dense. They typically have fewer calories per unit of mass, in large part because in many cases a lot of the bulk of the food is non-digestible plant fibers, and therefore you have more work to do to extract all the calories that you need. You will find that plant-feeding organisms often have specialized mouth parts such as grinding teeth for the breakdown of their food, that they might have specialized digestive tracts like multiple stomachs for the breakdown of plant fibers in multiple stages, and they often have a microbiome of microorganisms that help them to digest tough plant fibers. Now, herbivore is not a universal strategy that is unvariant. You will find that most herbivores have certain kinds of plants that they habitually eat. Some are more diverse than others in what they do. You have grazers, which are, basically your grass-eating animals like your cow. You have browsers, like deer, that basically munch on leaves and whatever other low-lying plants they can find or shrubbery that they can eat. You will find most plant eaters are going to have certain kinds of plants that they habitually eat, and oftentimes they'll have structures that make them good at consuming that. Now, this might be you have kind of a sub-diet within herbivore. For example, there are frugivores, F-R-U-G-I-V-O-R-E. My frugivores are going to be specialized fruit feeders. A lot of monkeys are frugivores. You could also have, and they have dexterous fingers for grabbing and manipulating fruits. You could have your palivore, P-A-L-Y-V-O-R-E. My palivore is a specialized pollen feeder. My honeybee, for example, is a great example of a palivore. You might even have animals that are basically specialized in eating a particular kind of plant almost to the exclusion of others. A classic example is the koala, which is almost exclusively a eucalyptus feeder. The koalas eat eucalyptus leaves and derive not only most of their nutrition, but most of their water supply from. The koala is in big trouble right now because eucalyptus forests have been cut down a lot in Australia to make room for development, and many of the ones that were left have burned in the recent fires in Australia, meaning that now a lot of koalas have lost habitat or are badly cut off from other stands of trees where they can migrate to, which has badly fragmented koala populations and is going to make it even more difficult for an already endangered species that is highly specialized in one particular food source to adapt and to survive in the long term. Now, we also have Carnivores. You all know carnivores, C-A-R-N-I-V-O-R-E. Prefix carn means meat or flesh. Your carnivores are your meat eaters. They are the organisms that are relying on animal protein as their primary source of nutrients. You're going to find that your carnivore has a dietary model that uses way more protein and fat than it does carbohydrates. So they're going to have to devote more energy to deaminating the proteins and beta oxidizing the fats they take in to process to make materials for glycolysis and other steps of aerobic respiration. Now, their food is generally trying to get away from them, or somebody is trying to keep them from getting their food in the case of, for example, mama animal protecting young animals. Therefore, you're going to find carnivores, sorry guys, terrible allergies today. Carnivores, therefore, have to spend more of their time and energy in thinking about how to get their food. You know, that the carnivore, the herbivore may eat more constantly. The carnivore, however, is going to stalk its food, sneak up on its food. The carnivore basically is going to have to acquire food that does not want to be acquired. And therefore, you will find carnivores very often swifter. They're very often, well, then you get an evolutionary arms race between the predator and the prey, where the prey gets swifter to avoid it. They are very often going to be more muscular. They're very often going to have natural weaponry like strong teeth or claws for bringing down their prey. They're very often going to have a more complex brain than an equivalently sized herbivore. Carnivore has to basically be able to outthink the things that it is eating, and therefore has to have more cognitive power than most of your prey animals. You will find in terms of their digestive structures, carnivores have specialized teeth for processing meats. They have more sharp cusped teeth rather than grinding teeth like you find in your herbivores. They have a much larger stomach to slowly break down the proteins and the fats that they take in their diet. They have to have a digestive tract that is capable of moving along waste materials with less raw fibers in them. And they're going to have a dietary strategy that often involves eating large amounts of food in one go and then not eating for a prolonged period of time. It's not unusual for a carnivore to have a big meal, kill and eat a prey animal, and then not eat for days, or in some cases, maybe weeks. Then you have your omnivores, O-M-N-I, omnivore. An omnivore, prefix omni means all. Omnivores consume both plant and animal materials. Actually, before I leave behind carnivores, let me back up for 1 second, that you can have specialized carnivores, just like you have specialized herbivores. Some carnivores prey on particular kinds of animal matter. For example, you have insectivores, which, as you can probably guess from the name, are specialized insect feeders, like your anteater, for example. You can also have things like ovivores, O-V-I-V-O-R-E-S. Ovivores are specialized egg feeders. They are nest robbers. There are certain snakes that do that, for example, and we believe that certain dinosaurs were specialized ovivores as well. Now then you've got, again, your omnivore. And your omnivores are organisms that have a broad diet containing both plant and animal matter, that the omnivore is exploiting a wide variety of food sources. Now, my omnivore prefix omni says everything, but most omnivores don't eat everything with equal facility. Most omnivores have certain kinds of things they can and cannot digest effectively. For example, you cannot effectively live on grass. Grass is mostly cellulose fiber, which your body is not able to digest. So even though you are an omnivore, that is not a thing that is a good food source for you, even if you own a cow that is happily munching away on that grass. You can eat your cow, you cannot eat the grass that the cow is eating. So most omnivores, like most carnivores and most herbivores, are going to have specializations in their diet. They're going to prefer certain foods over others based on their habitat and their features. Some omnivores are more herbivorous. You might be surprised to learn, for example, that bears eat a lot more plant food than they do animal food. Some are more carnivorous, meaning that although they will exploit a variety of nutrients, that they are primarily relying on animal food. Being an omnivore, the thing that means is basically that you need both. Omnivore is not, okay, I can freely pick one or the other. Omnivore means my dietary strategy is specialized around acquiring both things. So omnivores tend to have mixed dentition, a wide range of different kinds of teeth to process different kinds of food. Omnivores tend to have very adaptable digestive tracts that can handle both plant and animal materials. Omnivores tend to have feeding strategies and habits that involve moving around a lot and taking in a variety of different kinds of foods. But the thing about being an omnivore is that your system requires things that come from both. In other words, your body, your metabolism is looking for nutrients that are really best acquired from the animal kingdom and also for nutrients that are best acquired from the plant kingdom. Human beings are omnivores. That is our nature. Anybody who tries to tell you we are naturally a vegetarian animal is either lying or simply has not studied their tooth biology, because you can look at our teeth, and we have teeth that are exclusively predatory teeth, the canines, and teeth that are exclusively herbivore teeth, the molars. We have both kinds of teeth in our mouths. We evolved to eat both kinds of things. There are a few primates that are not omnivores, but they are the exception, not the rule. For example, the tarsier is exclusively an insectivore, and the colobus monkey is exclusively a leaf eater. But that is, again, rather exceptional. Most primates are omnivorous. Now, a thing I want to point out about these dietary strategies before we leave them behind is that when I talk about an animal being an herbivore or a carnivore, a lot of times that is not an absolute. We can talk about an obligate herbivore or an obligate carnivore or a facultative herbivore or facultative carnivore. An obligate animal is obligate, obligate like obligated. An obligate organism for a dietary strategy must eat that way. So an obligate carnivore is not going to be able to survive without animal prey. Dogs and cats are obligate carnivores. They need things acquired from animal food. Trying to give your dog a vegetarian diet or a vegan diet is really a gross unkindness to that animal, because you're not giving it the things that it requires. Likewise, an obligate herbivore needs plant matter. It's going to not be able to survive properly without that as the chief part of its diet. Your cow and your deer, for example, those are both obligate herbivores. They cannot get by with a meat diet. Now, that said, there are some animals that will occasionally exploit foods outside of their normal type, either because their normal food is in scarce supply and they need to get what nutrients they can, even if it's not their normal preferred food type, or because they're trying to get a specific nutrient that is difficult to acquire from the normal things that they eat. So that would be my facultative herbivore or carnivore. F-A-C-U-L-T-A-T-I-V, facultative. That means that you can consume that food when you need to. So a facultative carnivore will occasionally exploit animal food while normally eating plant food. And a facultative herbivore will occasionally munch on some plant food while primarily eating animal food. I observed facultative herbivorous behavior when I was in the Galapagos Islands in January of this year, when an elephant seal came to the islands. The elephant seal is not a native animal in the Galapagos Islands. They're normally found in Antarctica or along the western coast of South America. But once in a while during their migrating season, one of them will get stuck in an ocean current that's going the wrong way, and it will end up being carried to the Galapagos Islands, which are about 600 miles west of the nation of Ecuador in the Pacific Ocean. Now, it just so happened that while we were in the Galapagos, an elephant seal showed up at the island of Isabela. And we tracked it down, and the elephant seal was swimming around in a lagoon. And elephant seals are obligate carnivores. They need meats in their very cold, icy environments. In Antarctica, there's not a lot of plant matter to chew on. You're pretty much eating animals. A lot of your polar animals are obligate carnivores. They have to be because there isn't plant matter to rely upon. But I observed facultative herbivorous behavior in that I watched this elephant seal reach out of the water and munch leaves off of a nearby plant. That was likely because the animal, frankly, was having a hard time hunting in an environment that was unfamiliar to it and was hungry. I also witnessed that same elephant seal being approached by a local baby sea lion, which was swimming up to it curiously to check it out, and the elephant seal went after it. I actually didn't see the end of that. I don't know if the baby seal became a meal or not, baby sea lion, excuse me, but the elephant seal chased it down, and they swam out of my sight. But that was facultative herbivorous behavior. You can also have facultative carnivorous behavior, in which an animal that is normally an herbivore consumes some animal matter, either because it needs the food or because it's trying to get nutrients like elemental metals like iron and selenium that are really hard to get in large amounts from the plant world. If you want to watch something very disturbing and ruin Bambi for yourself forever, go on YouTube and look for a video of a deer eating a bird. And you can actually watch a deer stalking and killing and devouring a bird, which is a behavior that we do see once in a while. So you'll see facultative adjustments to normal dietary strategies, some because of desperation, some because of trying to acquire nutrients that are in short supply in your normal food. But when I'm talking about an omnivore is basically an obligate carnivore and herbivore. An omnivore needs both kinds of nutrients. All right, so far so good. Speaking of, let's talk nutrients for a minute. Why do animals need to eat? Well, that sounds like a no-brainer question, right? Of course you need to eat. Well, a plant doesn't need to eat. Why do you need to eat? There are a few reasons why animals need to eat. First and foremost, the very obvious one is for energy. That you are not capable of building your own food. A plant is a photoautotroph. A plant is able to synthesize its own food and its own biomolecules from the energy of sunlight. Basically, the plant uses solar energy to power the endothermic reactions by which it joins together carbon dioxide and water to make glucose, releasing oxygen as a byproduct of that reaction. So the plant builds its own carbs that it needs not only for energy production, but also for building its own structure. So you can't do that. We do not have the means of building our own food from scratch. Now, your liver can do a thing called gluconeogenesis, 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 which is the production of glucose within the liver. Yes, your liver can make glucose, which your body can then use for metabolism, but it has to make it from other food. It has to make it from proteins or from fats, or occasionally regenerate it from lactic acid after a lot of exercise. So even then, you got to be taking in external food. Your body can't make nutrient molecules for itself. We can't sit out in the sun and synthesize our dinner. So we need food in order to make ATP. That is the substrate for all the chemical reactions involved in the production of basic energy-bearing molecules for your cells. Now, the default fuel of all cellular life, you all know, is carbohydrates, glucose and their equivalents. But if I am a facultative, if I am an obligate carnivore, clearly I'm not eating a lot of carbs. And therefore, you're going to find that your carnivores have to engage in some conversion processes, that their livers are good at nutrient interconversion for transforming the proteins and fats that they eat into molecules like acetyl and pyruvate, which can then be introduced into aerobic respiration in the absence of glucose. So, furnishing energy, number one thing. The bulk of the food you consume, that is what it goes for, because you, as an animal, are also a high energy organism. Animals consume a lot of energy. They burn through way more energy than plants or fungi do, for the very simple reason that we engage in locomotion. We move. Movement is expensive. Movement costs a lot in energy terms. Muscles are energy-hungry tissue. Nervous systems are energy-hungry tissue, generating those electrical impulses that send signals throughout your body. So animals, gram for gram, have far higher energy costs than an equivalently sized plant. You know, take a plant the same mass as you, and that plant is burning through way fewer calories than you are to keep itself going. So, ATP synthesis, number one priority. Second priority after that is, for most animals, biosynthesis, by which I mean we are building organic molecules. That we have to build stuff, right? You're a chemoautotroph because you need raw materials not only for food, but also for repair and growth. If I'm a plant, I synthesize all the molecules I need to build my structure and grow leaves and so forth, again, from carbon dioxide and water that I take in using the energy of the sun. You can't do that. So your body needs to take in nutrients also to power the building of other structures. Under the heading of biosynthesis, we include growth, adding more cellular tissue to your body, whether that means, growth during your adolescent years, whether that means adding muscle mass, as you work out, whatever. You need biosynthesis for repair, for replacing damaged things, whether that means replacing the skin cells that constantly wear off and slough off of your body, whether that means healing from an injury. Those are both things you would need raw materials to do. This means generating cells for use inside of your body. This means producing white blood cells to patrol your body for infections and so forth. This means producing the various proteins that your body requires. Biosynthesis means that you have to be able to build the enzymes that digest your food. It means you have to build the keratin in your skin and the myosin in your muscles and all the various other biomolecules that your body needs. You need raw materials for reproduction. Whether your reproductive method is sexual or asexual, your body is setting aside cells to grow a new living thing and must nourish those cells and nourish the growth and division of new cells. Biosynthesis also includes storage, taking in more nutrients than you need in order to get yourself through a lean time. And that is not just okay, I do this if I happen to eat too much strategy. It is a vital strategy for a lot of organisms. Consider that you are a hunter-gatherer like ourselves. Humans are hunter-gatherers in their natural state, and that means you don't know where your next meal is coming from. Having the ability to synthesize storage molecules like fats is really essential to making sure you can get by until you find the next meal. It's even more crucial if I am an animal that hibernates. Think about a bear that before winter, the bear spends the bulk of its time eating and eating and eating as much as it can, building up a store of fat that its body will burn to power its metabolism during those long months of slumber. So these are all biosynthetic activities. They are the second priority for the food that we take in, providing raw materials that your body can use for biosynthesis. The proteins, or more to put it this way, the amino acids, the fatty acids, the nucleic acids, or nucleotides, let's say, and the simple sugars that your body requires to build cells and to repair cells and to build the various molecules that keep you going. If you are an endotherm, another important priority for your metabolism is generation of heat. Now, if I'm an ectotherm, if I'm a cold-blooded animal, this isn't a concern because my body is not maintaining its own temperature. I don't need to burn food to do that because it's not a thing I can do. I extract most of my heat from the environment around me, minus incidental heat released as a byproduct of other chemical reactions. But you are an endotherm. You are a mammal. And like all endotherms, your body maintains its temperature regardless of external conditions. Ergo, you need the food coming in order to power that. Some of the food you're taking in is being burned not just to make ATP, but to make heat, to release energy in the form of heat, which then can serve to help you maintain that body temperature. And this is another reason why you as a mammal are a much more active animal than your average reptile, because we as a warm-blooded critter needs to be burning through more food faster to maintain our warm status. Other things that you need food for. Essential amino acids. Now, biosynthesis is one thing, but let's talk about some specific nutrients. Essential amino acids. Think back to your Bio 1. How many amino acids do living things use? 20. There are 20 amino acids employed by all living things. It is the same 20 amino acids in all living things. I use the same amino acids in my body that an oak tree uses in any of its proteins. Here's the thing. Your body cannot make all of them. Given dietary raw materials, given the stuff coming in from diet, most animals can synthesize 8 or 9 amino acids in as much quantity as they require. In other words, As long as I'm being fed 8 or 9 of the 20 amino acids, my body can build for itself. I don't need to take in those specific amino acids. I can make them as long as I have raw materials to work. There are, depending on what species you are, 2 or 3 amino acids that your body can make some of. That you can make a bit of that amino acid, and that helps with some of your needs, but it's not enough to meet your metabolic needs. Ergo, you must supplement with a source of that amino acid from outside of your body. You have to take in at least a little of that amino acid to meet your full metabolic needs. And then there are, depending on what species you are, 8 or 9 amino acids that you can't make at all. 8 or 9 amino acids that your body is completely unable to synthesize, and therefore the only way to get them is to extract them from diets. In humans, there are 8 amino acids that we can produce for ourselves, 3 we can make some of, and 9, I believe, that we have to get exclusively from dietary sources. The amino acids that you have to take in from the outside are the essential amino acids. So an essential amino acid is one that your body can't make on its own. The only way to get it is from your food. Or, at the very least, you have to get some of it from your food. So that means it matters, by the way, what proteins you are consuming. Not all proteins are equal. Hold on one moment, folks. Sorry about that. Let's think about that for a second. Not all things that contain protein contain everything you need. Now, animal proteins in general are what we call complete proteins. An animal protein, in almost all cases, is a complete protein, meaning that they contain all 20 amino acids. That when you're eating meat, when you're eating eggs, when you're eating animal stuff, in almost all cases, you are getting all 20 of the amino acids, both essential and non-essential amino acids. When you're eating plant proteins, that is harder. There are very few complete proteins in the plant world, meaning proteins that provide you with every essential amino acid. Most plant proteins are incomplete proteins, meaning they lack at least one essential amino acid, or at least in quantities sufficient to meet biological needs. So what this means is that when you're an herbivore, in most cases, you need to consume more than one kind of plant. That you, if you want to build all of the proteins your body needs to make sure that you are getting all the amino acids that you need to get a variety of plants in your diet, because some plants will furnish some amino acids and some will furnish other amino acids, but there are very, very few complete proteins in the plant world. There are a couple, but not a whole lot. And we as humans, we came up in an environment in which complete proteins in the plant world were exceedingly hard to come by. That in the savannas of Africa, where Homo sapiens evolved, complete plant proteins are almost non-existent. Ergo, our ancestors pretty much relied on animal tissue as their source of protein, and it was hard for them to be a vegetarian. If you want to be a vegetarian or a vegan, I want to tell you right now, you're working against biology at a certain extent as a human being. You know, you're an omnivore by nature. We are evolved and adapted around consuming both of those things. Our bodies need nutrients that come from both of those things. It is possible to be a vegetarian or a vegan and get all of the amino acids you require, but it requires you to pay some attention. You can't just say, okay, that plant food has protein in it, I'll just eat that all the time and I'll get all my protein, unless it is one of the rare complete proteins in the plant world of plants that we normally have available to us. Then no, if you're just relying on one source of plant protein all the time, you're not going to get everything you require. And some folks who are on long-standing vegetarian diets or vegan diets end up having weird nutritional disorders resultant from not getting one specific amino acid, or resultant from not getting one specific mineral that is really hard to obtain from plants, but is readily available in the bodies of animals. So I say, if you want to be a vegetarian or a vegan, the smart thing to do is to learn some biochemistry, get some idea of which plant foods will contain which amino acids, so that you know that you're eating a variety of plant foods to get all of the essential amino acids you require. Because I'm here to tell you that if you're not paying attention to which plants contain which, there's a decent chance you're going to be ending up deficient. If you are a vegetarian and you cannot tell me where you're getting your glutamic acid from, you're doing it wrong. Now, how about other essential things? We also have essential fatty acids. In addition to essential amino acids, essential fatty acids. Your body as an animal is pretty good at making saturated fatty acids. Unsaturated fatty acids are a little harder to come by in the bodies of most animals. Ergo, you need to get them from your diets. So we take in unsaturated fatty acids from dietary sources. Those are more abundant, I should point out, in plants than in animals. If you're eating an exclusively omnivorous diet, actually you're probably not going to run up deficient because everything we eat contains cells, and we find unsaturated fatty acids in phospholipids. So if you're eating, odds are pretty good you are getting the essential fatty acids that your body is unable to build. Your body can build some fatty acids, but not all fatty acids. But assuming that you are taking in food of any kind, odds are you're getting all the essential fatty acids that are required. Then we have what are called essential vitamins. A vitamin is a small organic molecule that's needed for a certain chemical reaction in your body. Vitamins are not required as a source of nutrients, nor are they required for biosynthesis purposes. They are basically participating in other chemical reactions. A lot of vitamins are coenzymes, meaning that they carry things from one step of a biological reaction to the next. There is some disagreement in the world of nutrition about exactly how many vitamins are essential. We have identified about 11 essential vitamins to date. Your body is able to make some amount of certain vitamins. Not all vitamins are essential. For example, vitamin D. If you are getting adequate sunlight, your body will synthesize all the vitamin D that it requires, and therefore vitamin D is not considered an essential vitamin because your body can make it. Now, as with the proteins, sometimes your body can make a little bit of a vitamin, but not all the vitamin that it requires. But a lot of vitamins are essential. They have to come from outside of you. Your body cannot synthesize them at all. Vitamin K, vitamin A, vitamin B12, all of these are essential vitamins. Incidentally, fun fact about vitamin D. Vitamin D is synthesized as a consequence of sun exposure. When your body is exposed to sunlight, it stimulates chemical reactions in your skin and your kidneys that facilitate the making of vitamin D. If you are not getting adequate sunlight, you may come up vitamin D deficient. And that is why we put vitamin D in our milk products in this society, because most of us are consuming some kind of milk product on a regular basis. Milk is not naturally rich in vitamin D, but we tend to add vitamin D to our milk to make sure that we are getting enough of it. We need to do that because we are living in a latitude. Okay, I don't know where you're watching this from, but assuming you're living in North America, I'm living in Pittsburgh, I'm assuming you might be around this area. But if you're living at this latitude in this part of the world, you're probably not getting all that much sunlight on a regular basis, partly because there's less bright sun here than there is in, say, tropical regions, and partly because, for reasons of both climate and social habits, we cover a significant part of our body surface area in clothing, which means less skin exposure for vitamin D synthesis. And also, most of us, frankly, spend a lot of time indoors. We have indoor occupations. Most of us have jobs that keep us in offices or in laboratories or in classrooms, And as such, a lot of us are basically indoor animals, meaning that we're not getting the sun exposure that facilitates good vitamin D synthesis. I cannot give you an exact figure for how much sunlight you need to do that thing. It's going to vary depending on where you live, on how much time you spend outside, and also your pigmentation. Because the more pigmentation you have, the darker your skin, the less solar radiation is getting through to the cells in your skin that stimulate this. Ergo, darker-skinned individuals have a harder time synthesizing vitamin D than lighter-skinned individuals. There is a reason why if you map human skin color on a map of the planet, you will find that the further north you get, the paler people tend to be. Because if you're living in, say, Sweden, when you're pretty close to the Arctic Circle, you're not getting a whole lot of sun. Ergo, having paler skin means that your body is absorbing more solar radiation, and therefore you getting more vitamin D synthesis out of the limited available sunlight. Take that Swedish person and put them at the equator, they're going to need a lot of sunscreen. Conversely, equatorial populations in Africa tend to have much darker skin because for them, the danger is much more radiation exposure from the very intense sunlight. So there's ample sunlight. It is not hard to synthesize all the vitamin D you require, but the darker pigmentation is necessary because even though it slows vitamin D production, it also protects you against UV radiation. So there's a trade-off that has to happen in human bodies for this, and we've adapted globally in this way, and it's a big factor in skin coloration. But since we also can move around and migrate significantly, if you're a darker skinned person living in New York or Maine, then having that supplemental vitamin D in your diet is probably way more important than it is for that same person living in Florida. Okay, so essential vitamins. And there is some disagreement on whether certain compounds are essential vitamins or not. Lycopene, for example, is a thing you hear a lot about in health products, but I'm here to tell you that nutritionists and biologists are not sold on whether lycopene is an essential vitamin or not. If it is, your body only needs it in very tiny microscopic quantities. Jury's still out on exactly what it's doing. So there are probably more essential vitamins we haven't discovered, but many of them are very likely things your body needs in micronutrient quantities, not in any significant amount. And finally, in terms of things you need from your food, we have essential minerals. The difference between vitamins and minerals, we always talk about them together, is that vitamins are organic, minerals are inorganic. Typically, minerals are elemental metals, things that your body needs in very small quantities. Often they're needed as cofactors for chemical reactions to soak up excess electrons. Sometimes they are needed for other steps of important chemical reactions, like the way that your cells need sodium to absorb glucose. So there are a number of essential minerals. Once again, there's some debate about exactly how many minerals are essential. Essential minerals that you're probably well aware of: sodium, potassium, iron, zinc, magnesium, chromium you need a little bit of, selenium you need a little bit of, molybdenum you need a little bit of. Your body actually needs like 25 elements, 26 elements in trace quantities. So again, a lot of those essential minerals are in microgram units, that if you're eating at all, you're probably getting enough of them. But there are others that we have to take some care to acquire. And by the way, this also makes another important case for varied diets. Not all foods are equally rich in all vitamins and minerals, as I am sure you're well aware. And if you're eating all the same foods all the time without varying your diet, there's a very good chance of coming up deficient on one or more essential vitamins or minerals. The average American is deficient in at least one vitamin or mineral. That's not at all unusual in our culture. So a lot of that comes down to the fact that A, we don't eat a lot of fruits and vegetables that give us a wide variety of those things, and B, we don't have a lot of dietary variety in general. Most of us tend to eat the same basic things pretty regularly, and therefore, if you're not changing up your diet, you're more likely to end up with nutritional deficiencies. Bottom line, as an omnivore living in a non-hunter-gatherer society, you have some special responsibilities to pay attention to the nutritional content of your food and make sure that you're getting not only the calories you need, but the specific nutrients from that food that you require, the essential vitamins, minerals, and amino acids that your body is unable to make for itself. So that's a pretty good summary of why animals need to eat. You need to eat for energy, you need to eat for biosynthesis, you need to eat for essential nutrients, whether that's amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, or minerals. You need to eat for your heat production if you are an endotherm. So a lot of different reasons why food is required for an animal. If you are getting not enough food, you are undernourished. An animal that is undernourished, UNDERNOURISHED. If you're undernourished, that basically means you're not acquiring sufficient calories, that your body is not taking in enough calories to meet energetic demands. An undernourished animal is a starving animal, and that means that that animal is going to have to dip into storage molecules, stored fat, stored glycogen, and in the extremis of starvation, start cannibalizing its own muscular tissue, the walls of its own organs. That's really what happens when you die of starvation, that your body is shutting down because it is cannibalizing itself to get the nutrients that it needs, and it cannot get enough of them without causing a fundamental breakdown. So that's undernourishment. Now, let's talk about malnourishment. Malnourishment and undernourishment are not the same thing. Malnourishment means that you're getting enough energy, but you're not getting enough of one or more essential nutrients. That, yeah, I've got enough calories coming in to power my metabolism, but maybe I don't have enough vitamin A, or maybe I'm not getting enough zinc, or whatever else. That is malnourishment. Malnourishment can have a wide variety of effects depending on what specific nutrient the animal is deficient in. And usually it's readily correctable by consuming a food that contains it. Or in the case of us, we often consume a multivitamin or a nutritional supplement of some kind. Now then there's overnourishment, and mal, M-A-L, nourishment. Overnourishment is the overconsumption of calories, that you're taking in more calories than you require. Overnourishment is a relatively rare thing in nature. Most animals are not in the position to gorge themselves to the point of having too many calories. But you will find a lot of animals, when they have the opportunity to do so, will. For the very simple reason that it's a good survival strategy. That if you overnourish, your body's primary thing that it does is to create storage molecules. That we create glycogen as a storage form of glucose. We create fat as a storage form of lipids. So when your body becomes overnourished, we build up storage molecules which we can then tap into in times of undernourishment. So you'll find a lot of animals in the wild, when they get the opportunity to overnourish, will absolutely do that thing. It's a good survival strategy if you're prowling the wilderness and do not know when your next meal is coming from. I mentioned in my last chapter, or a chapter or two ago, about optimal foraging theory, about how as an omnivore, we tend to have a taste preference for sugary and fatty foods. Why? Because those are calorically dense foods, and if we overnourish on those things, that means you can go longer between now and your next meal. Now, in the wild, again, overnourishment is rare. Most animals don't necessarily have this opportunity. Some animals in the wild will deliberately overnourish in preparation for certain activities. For example, a lot of animals will deliberately overnourish in the preparation for the mating season, particularly animals that are going to be going somewhere to spawn or to a traditional mating ground of one kind or another. A lot of animals will overnourish in preparation for migration, because if you're going to be flying for days at a time and not stopping to eat, well, that's important. A lot of animals will overnourish in preparation for gestation of young, that the female will overnourish before she lays eggs, for example. And a lot of animals will overnourish in preparation for hibernation, building up food stores to get them through a long period of inactivity. So there are situations in nature in which animals deliberately overnourish, dedicating more of their time and energy to food acquisition, specifically to make ready for a time of privation or a time of intense energy expenditure. Now you, as a domesticated animal, we'll say that, overnourish quite easily. No, I know there are plenty of people who are food insecure. It's a tragedy that in a world that makes many times more food than is required to feed everyone, that a significant percentage of our global population goes hungry every night. But that's a problem for another class, I think. That said, however, here in Western civilization, odds are pretty good you know where your next meal is coming from. But, as I said previously about optimal foraging theory, monkey brain doesn't know that. Monkey brain says eat the fatty and sugary stuff while you can get it. And most of us do not have a hard time acquiring sufficient calories. That combination of factors, ease of access to food, we don't have to hunt and gather for it, and therefore we're spending less energy to get our food, coupled with ease of access to fatty and sugary foods, which in the wild tend to be more scarce, means that it is easy for humans in developed countries to overnourish, and we often do so. In fact, we as humans often encounter the nasty 1-2 punch of being simultaneously overnourished and malnourished. In other words, getting too many calories, but simultaneously still not getting enough of one or more essential nutrients. So, same with our domestic animals. Your cats, your dog, a lot of our livestock, a lot of these animals end up overnourished because we feed them way more food than they require, but they still have the instincts that say, okay, eat that while you can get it. In the wild, it's not often you see a fat wolf because they don't have the opportunity to do that thing. All right, so what I'm giving you here is in a basic layout of how animals eat and why they eat. I've talked to you about the basic metabolic and dietary strategies, the basic ways of taking in food, and the reasons why food is needed for an animal in the first place. So that gets us a start on this basic thing. I'm not quite done talking about animal nutrition and digestion. We've talked about the nutrition side of it pretty well. Next time we're going to get more to the digestive side. I'm going to start introducing you to the specific anatomical structures that animals possess by way of how they eat. Obviously, not all animals eat the same way. We cannot cover every kind of animal digestive system, but we're going to take a look at some representative ones and see different ways that animals take in, process, and break down their food. Okay? Thanks for your attention, folks. Hope you're all having a good afternoon. Talk to you soon.